Not yet, but sometimes it takes a second. Yeah, now
Yeah.
it started.
Great. And if it's all right, then you should also be able to see my screen now and
Yes.
my presentation. So today we will be talking about living labs. And the program is quite condensed, but we have booked some times for questions and discussions in this program. We will start with the background and why we have this Living Lab Masterclass in general. Then we will have 2 examples of Living Lab research brought to us by our guests. Then we'll have another active break, which will not be as active as this one. It's your choice, whether you want to do exercises or just maybe take a walk and take a cup of tea in the kitchen. And we will close, or the second part of this masterclass will be about living labs in Vitality Academy research. So people from outside Vitality Academy can learn and discuss with us where we have similar touch points when it comes to living lab research. So today, the world is facing a myriad of complex societal challenges, which range from climate change through plastic pollution to global pandemic, as we all have experienced it over a year ago now, but also physical inactivity and unhealthy lifestyles, such as nutrition in the Western world, which also leads to multiple long-term conditions and chronic health conditions. And in other way, these could be avoided. The societal issues are a result of malfunction in various levels of our ecosystem. For example, the ever-rising urbanization, overconsumption, inequality in various socioeconomic layers and across different geographical contexts. And human, of course, superiority complex, I think. But this complexity also suggests paths to potential solutions. And if we look at the world as a complex socio-technical system, we will see that there are different layers to it. And this perspective allows us to not only have a holistic view and see that everything is related and interacting, but also to zoom in into specific layers, actors, and contexts in our system. So we can study and understand individual layers, micro layers, community and societal layers, and in general, human population relationships with environment. And this perspective of a systemic perspective allows us to probably is the only way actually to tackle these urgent societal issues of today. And however, this also requires us to collaborate. So actually, we cannot do it by ourselves in single disciplines or in single professions. So we need different expertise, knowledge, experience, and of course, manpower to execute the change in the context. And if we want to reverse a slow down, for example, climate change, we need actions on different layers of this ecosystem and societal system. We need biologists, manufacturers, human behavior experts, sociologists, and so on to work together. And the same holds for pandemic, COVID pandemic. So we all have to contribute to comply with regulations that are imposed on us. But also researchers have to find ways to protect us from this virus. But the same holds also for a pandemic of, for example, physical inactivity or unhealthy nutrition or malnutrition, if some researchers from that discipline would say. So we need people to work together, all people, in fact. And collaboration is a key if we are ever to solve and tackle these challenges. But to do that, we also need a right context. And we believe that that context might as well be a living lab. And a living lab, whether regarded as an approach, milieu for innovation, or ecosystem, offers a variety of benefits for research and development activities targeting societal challenges. And not surprisingly, Living Lab research plays a central role in Vitality Academy vision and activities. But although central and important, many of us still wonder, to what extent and when our research is really a living lab research, and when do we really work in living labs, and how do we, in fact, actually define living labs? And what we see is that there are actually a lot of different definitions, and living lab today is used quite as a buzzword. So what is living lab is the topic of today. And we will discuss its nature, and the use in different fields by different professionals and different researchers. And I think that this masterclass in general is a very good example on how collaboration can lead to interesting discussions, knowledge sharing, new ideas, and hopefully also connections. We would like to, well, we would not be able actually to host today if we were not collaborating. So we have received these wonderful contributions from our guests that you have received in the program and saw in the first slide, and also from our Vitality Academy, our own community. And that's the labor of everyone. So we, as organization committee, would like to really thank to everyone. I would also personally would like to express my gratitude to Ayla, Lonak, and Marley for joining me on this organizational journey and making this all happen. It was great pleasure to work with you, and I know that we have more plans for the coming year. And I would like to say that Ayla, it's your last day, so I'm really glad that you're joining us today before you go to your maternity leave. So before I give a word to our guest, I would still like to give a big background on how, let's say, in my research, I look at living labs and what it really is. So living labs are practice-driven phenomena, an open innovation landscape that enables in situ inclusive research and design to tackle societally relevant issues, or one may call it societal challenges. And today, there is no unanimous definition of what living labs are. So we actually have to borrow or decide which definitions we will use if we talk about living labs in our research. Nevertheless, when scrolling through the literature of living labs, we come across two rather distinct groups of living lab descriptions. On one hand, some researchers tend to refer to living labs as methodology or approach, where multi-stakeholder collaboration, user involvement, technology infrastructure, and research and design in situ lies central. And on the other hand, some researchers define living lab as a setting or milieu for innovation. And here, in addition to also already mentioned collaboration, user involvement, and technology use, a certain physicality comes at play. So we can think about a setting that is called a living lab. It can be a street, a specific well-defined neighborhood, or perhaps a building. So to describe the differences between milieu and approach in more detail, I refer to Wekam and colleagues' papers. It's one of them. And here we see basically that a living lab setting offers lifespan for research and innovation activities. As usually, physical living labs are confined to a certain urban and technological infrastructure. It is also a real-life setting, and it easily allows us to apply ecosystem approach and scale up or down our research and research outcomes. And finally, it enables sustainable relationships because we're confined to that one context for a longer period of time, and that helps for collaboration, inclusive research, empowerment of participants who are playing a role in that setting, and so on. While the living lab approach, according to Wekam and colleagues, is primarily defined with in situ context research and evaluation, co-creation, and user involvement. And that, of course, is also a part of the living lab setting, but this means in a way that you can take approach and copy it to different contexts, which probably you will have to struggle with sustainability of your research. And today we'll hear more about how Living Lab approach and methodology and setting is understood in different research projects and by different researchers. But in sum, my short story to make it even shorter, the introduction of a phenomenon of the Living Lab is that basically it's all about research and innovation in collaborative setting between different stakeholders and of course including citizens, which at some points are perhaps end users. So now I would like to invite our first guest, and that is Maaike, to share her experience of working in living labs. And Maaike is a PhD, my old colleague from, she's very young, but my old colleague from Human Technology Interaction Group, Industrial Engineering and Innovation Science Department at TU. Maaike, I will stop sharing my screen now and give you a word.
Yes. Okay. Now everything is working. Thank you for the kind introduction. I'm very happy that you have invited me here in this nice network and this lovely masterclass, because I actually think this is a very important, or at least relevant, discussion to have. So yes, I will tell you first something short about myself, and then actually about my LivingLab experience, let's say. So first, a bit about me. Indeed, as Indra already told, I'm a PhD candidate at the Human Technology Interaction Group in the Department of Industrial Engineering and Innovation Sciences at the Eindhoven University of Technology. And I started just over 3 years ago, so I'm now finishing off my my work. And my work is on dynamic lighting in office environments, and more specifically, the effects of dynamic lighting on subjective experiences, objective task performance, and physiological responses of office occupants, so the people that work in offices. And we have done various types of research. By the way, if there are any questions, then feel free to interrupt, and I can't see the chat, so just shout and then I'll answer your question. But so we've done various types of research, and on the one hand, we have done several laboratory studies that we invited participants, and we exposed them to different type of lighting scenarios, and then we measured their subjective experiences, so what they think about the lights and how alert they feel, those kind of things. That's all what we measure, and as well we have them do some tasks, and we measure their physiological responses, and then we try to see how they respond to the changes in light that we present them. So that's what we do in lab studies. But of course, for ecological validity, we also want to do field studies, or maybe it should be called LivingLab studies. I don't know. And I think that's exactly the point of the debate that we are talking about here. So one of the studies in the past 3 years that I did was, as I often just call it, a field study in our great Atlas building. And I don't exactly know whether I don't believe you're all from the University of Eindhoven, but the Atlas building at the TUI campus is a very new building. So we moved in, I think, January 2016, and it's all brand new. And then the 4th until the 11th floor of this building are what's called a LivingLab. So that's the Atlas LivingLab. And the Atlas LivingLab has a great infrastructure, especially for our lighting research, because the luminaires that are in the building, they are all dimmable, and they have sensors in them, which can measure the movement in the area of the luminaire. And all this data can actually be retrieved from a nice database that they have for the entire building, or at least it's accessible for floor 4 to 11. And additionally, in this database, it's also possible to include new sensors and other building systems like the heating. So that's all. I think it sounds very great. But as I told you, I did a field study in this building, and what we did is not actually use the infrastructure. And that's actually, I think, if I think back about it, it's a bit weird. But the building was quite new, and in the end, we wanted to measure just many things, as you can see here, that were not, that we couldn't measure with the systems that the building already has. And for example, the light measurements that we wanted to do, there are sensors in the light, but they don't necessarily give us the light at the places that we wanted to measure it. So in the end, we did a study in the building with a very great infrastructure as a LivingLab infrastructure, but I would say we used LivingLab. It was just a simple field study, or simple, it's never simple. But in this field study, there were 30 participants, and I would say it's a sort of LivingLab approach that we used. And I see a typo here, but well, there were 30 participants that participated for 6 weeks, and they were exposed to various lighting conditions throughout these weeks. And in these weeks, they all performed multiple measurements. So there were just people working in this building, and we asked them to keep a sleep diary and to respond to questionnaires, which are the ESQs that you see here, to do multiple tasks throughout the day. And at the same time, we had them wear several sensors. And then additionally to that, as you could see in the short movie that I showed you just before, We measured all kinds of things of the environment. So we measured the temperature of the environment and the light in the environment and all those kind of things. So if I think about, what is a living lab, I often, on the one hand, originally I think it's maybe the way we use, at least it was just a synonym for a field study. And then there are of course many benefits that field studies have. So you have, it's very important for ecological validity, and there are just fewer demand characteristics than that you would have in a laboratory study. And you just take a bit more holistic perspective. So you take more into account and you gather very rich data. But with just a regular field study, there come also many complications because you just have very little control, and participants, they participate in your study, but at the same time, simultaneously, they are just living their life and working in an office, and they forget things, they cause dropout, they sometimes drop out. All those things can of course happen. And what I think is the main difference for if I think of a living lab as a field study or as an approach is that in my field study, we had data from many, many different sources which had to be combined. Whereas if you have, of course, a nice infrastructure that you can use, it could be that there's more data already in the same database, which saves you just a bit of time in the data process. So that's the most important for me as a field study. And if I think about the living lab as an infrastructure, I think that can really help you to organize the study that you are actually doing in the field. So it's a bit more lab-like and you have a bit more control, I think. And as I said, different types of data sources could be easy for data processing. But what I think is very complex if you have a fixed infrastructure somewhere, as what you have here, is that every time you want to do a study in this area, you are recruiting amongst the same type of people. So if you want to do something as we do, that we really ask people a lot to complete questionnaires, complete tasks, to our sensors, you must find people that are willing to participate every time, and you are every time looking in the same group of people for people to participate. So that is of course very tricky, and it could lead to over time that you have very little people that still want to participate. So I think that's something to take into account for such a living lab infrastructure, as I would call it. And what we also experienced here, although we didn't really use the infrastructure, we had to ask informed consent from everyone, also if people were not participating, because if we're in the room and we were manipulating the lighting, we had to tell them that we were manipulating the lighting, and they had to be okay with that. So that's also something that is a bit different with such an infrastructure that's just a bit more fixed and to the location. Then you are bothering the same type of people anyway every time. So I would say I would expect that over time less people want to participate. So if we think about what, I'm not sure whether it's very important to but what I think is a living lab can be many things, but it's just, I think it's always very important that if you talk about a living lab, that you specify what you are talking about, because it can be many things and there are so many interpretations. So I think that is most important for defining what is a living lab. That is in short what I wanted to tell you about my project. My project is part of the DINCA project. So if you want, you can take a look at the website. And if you otherwise want to contact me further, there's my email here. Thank you.
Super, Maaike. It was very interesting. Applause for you. And before we ask questions, because we reserved some time, it would be nice if we listen to Ninka first, and then we have sort of collaborative Q&A session of 10 minutes. So I would like to invite our second guest, and that's Ninka from Haagse Hogeschool. Please take the floor.
I don't know if I can make the screen bigger because I will spotlight you. Okay.
I will spotlight you. Yes.
Perfect. Well, I don't have a PowerPoint slideshow, and that's because I didn't want to make a slideshow about the experience of being in a living lab, because I think it's very important that you see me and my emotions of me as a researcher experiencing living lab research. So short, my background, I was doing my PhD at the University of Utrecht in social geography, looking at how the sport landscape of sport associations look like and if neighborhoods are influencing memberships. So I was doing very quantitative research, but then I got my lectureship in The Hague that Frank van Ekeren started about the social impact of sports on neighborhoods. And it was actually all the things that I was reading about, but I didn't know the insight, but only the objective. So I started working there last February, not this February, but 1 year ago, just before the lockdown in the LivingLab. And I will tell you a bit about our LivingLab. So our goal is in our LivingLab to create valuable encounters through sports and to make the neighborhood a little bit better by it. And how do we do this? Well, we do it with multiple stakeholders, like the municipality, sport coaches that are active in the neighborhood, and we as the Applied University of The Hague. But most important are the residents. And what we try to do with each other is to gain insight in what the wishes and needs are of the end users, and most of them, we see them as the residents that live in the neighborhood, and try to, within co-creation with the entire group, come to activities. And we do it because the municipality found out that implying sports activities just by doing it, the people of the environment in the neighborhood are not going to be more active. So because the location where we are at, so we have a physical location on a sports association club in the neighborhood of a more deprived area with more complex problems. The problems in the neighborhood are poverty, segregation, security problems. And so just implementing sports policy is not working. So we are trying to do it by a LivingLab approach. So making them part of the whole policy process, or it's not even making policy, but they are the experts, because we can think of what they need to do, but it's actually them who know what they want to do. And it's us who, as a group, can help them, support them, and co-create with them to new activities that can help the community and the neighborhood. And I think most important, by realizing and getting the end user involvement, is building relationships. So we try to build relationship with our different stakeholders within the community, key persons, also key companies, but mainly we focus, and especially we focus on the residents themselves. So what we try to do is build relationships with them, and we do that by doing participatory action research. In one group, it's really worked out really well. So I want to tell you a little bit more about that. And that's the Turkish and Moroccan women in the neighborhood. And it's especially striking that that's the group that is really eager and willing to participate in our method and also contribute to the LivingLab method. Because if you read all the studies about sport landscapes, it's always the group that doesn't want to sport, that's never very active, or it's always, if you read an article about sport participation, it always says like the lowest group is the Turkish Moroccan women because of their culture, because of their norms. And the thing is, what we found in this neighborhood, it is actually the group that really wants to be active in sports. And I also gained more insight in why they want to do it and why it is very valuable to them, and how it leads to encounters that are valuable. So what I do is I actually go and sport with them. So they came to us because they wanted to do some sports. We sat down with them and asked them what they wanted to do. They told us. We started with one activity, using your body for fitness movement. We have an instructor. She's from Iran and gives it. She's also from the neighborhood. And we started with 5 or 6 ladies, and we grew in 8 weeks to 22 women. Because what actually one of the basic needs that they really need for sports is to have a room without men, because that's one of the norms they have. They can do sports, but not if men are able to watch them move. So we actually had to provide with a female instructor, and we also put in screens in front of the entrance so that if people walk in, they don't have their eyes on the gym or at the hall where they exercise, and then when they feel safe and comfortable, they are willing to do a lot. So I went and sport every week with them, and slowly I got to know them. I got to know their personalities, their stories, and I was able to do a focus group with them, and I asked them if I could record it, and it was all fine. And they also told me, you do so much for us, so we are very willing to do something back for you. And they told me a lot in that focus group about their insights, how important sports activities actually is for them, because it's one of the rare moments they feel free, and it's on their time. They can decide what they can do, and they don't have to worry about doing stuff for the household, for the kids, for the husband, and they are actually not as free in their movements. Going to a market is not something that is normal in their lives. So going to a sports facility where they are at least fulfilled in their needs, then they are allowed to go and they feel very free. So from my experience, like building this relationship, invest in it by participating and put yourself very close with them, helps by getting them very active within the group. So we now also reached the point that 3 of the ladies are committed to our meetings with the multiple stakeholders. So they are actually now really part as a stakeholder within our meetings about how we can engage the community more, how we can reach the other women. And it's so much more valuable if they tell it to the other stakeholders than if I tell. So they tell me and I tell my colleagues in the team, like, hey, listen, we need to have screens because they think it's very important. But it's so much different energy when the women tell them themselves. So we all get more to their perspectives. And I think we only reached that point because we had that relationship. We built that relationship, because if I was just a researcher and I just came in sometimes and just asked them some questions, or I had a questionnaire, or I just went in and asked, can I do a focus group with you after a couple of weeks? I think they would have said no, because they wouldn't trust me, they wouldn't know me, and especially in this culture and group, it's very important. And they are now very feel very responsible, because you see them also, the empowerment you give them by giving them a voice in the part where policy is made, or the co-creation. I mean, you see them smiling all the time when they're in the meeting, because they feel heard, they feel valued, they feel empowered. And that gives the whole team energy, because they can see their energy, and that's exactly the people that we are working for. Those are the end users, the expert, and we can see the enjoyment in their eyes and in their words. But also, like, we have some ideas. I mean, I come driving from Bussum. I drive into this area. That's not my area. I don't know how it is to live there. So if they tell us, we all get more perspective. We all get why it's very important. And with this group, we also went from 1 moment of sports to 3 times sports in the week, because they enjoyed it so much. They wanted more, and we could help them because we had the capacity and the availability. So we continued. And another very beautiful example is that they told me, we started walking outside. I had a talk with one of the moms, because of COVID, our sports association was closed. And I talked with one of the ladies, and she actually came up with the best idea to do a roulette carousel walking with exercising. So they walk with a partner with 1.5 meters. In front of them are others, and after a couple of minutes, they swap from partners. So they still meet each other, we still create the valuable encounter, and we sport and do exercise. And I didn't do anything. I just had a talk with one of the ladies and asked her, like, what do you want to do? And she came up with the best solution that I couldn't have thought of. And while we were walking, they said, like, okay, like, but Nienke, we have to stop in a couple of weeks because it's Ramadan. In my mind, it was like, okay, but it's Ramadan, you do this every year. Okay, we will downgrade the exercising, we will just walk. So I asked them, like, can we do just walking? And they said, no, we cannot do it. So I said, like, okay, I started asking about Ramadan, about their beliefs, about their norms. Why do they do the Ramadan? Why is it valuable for them? And then one of the ladies said, Nienke, if you really want to find out, you should just do it one day. And I said, well, that's a great idea. So at the end, a couple of weeks ago, I started to do one day of Ramadan. I set my alarm 3 o'clock in the morning, had my breakfast, jumped in the car, went to The Hague. And from 10 o'clock in the morning till 10 in the evening, I was with her and her family, with her husband. And I saw so many things and so many insights, and I had the experience. And I thought, okay, it's no way possible to do any exercising during Ramadan because you don't drink from 4 o'clock till 9 o'clock in the evening. You have to reserve everything. So for me, it made so much more sense than to experiencing and to get to the perspective. And I honestly believe that I would never have asked to be in such an intimate position to be with her in her house for a whole day if I didn't have that relationship through participatory research. So it gives me a lot of insight. It leads to them being very willingly to participate in the whole process of the LivingLab. And it also we also see that it by word in the community it spreads. So there's a sister of one of the ladies who came to me and said, like, hey, we heard so many good stories here. I would also like, with a couple of friends, come and sport here. And she's a Muslim lady, 55 plus. So that's even a group that is never talked about. It's, I mean, the group that you cannot reach. And by just knowing that they have a trustworthy place where you listen to their needs and wishes, at the end they start coming to you and you don't need to find them anymore. So yeah, that's my story as a researcher, coming from a very quantitative to a very qualitative perspective. If you want to have, I think one of the success stories by creating a LivingLab is be there where it happens. So don't be there where it doesn't happen, but create that physical spot, because for us it's actually crucial. And also put yourself without judgment very close to the end users and make the end user are our stars, the experts. I'm just the one, the researcher with some knowledge who drives in. So yeah, that would be my perspective of a LivingLab. Yeah, you have to do it with multiple stakeholders. In the middle, we have the impact. That's very important and should always be our focus. How can we have impact for the neighborhood? But most important, how can we do it in co-creation every step with the end user? So in our case, the residents of the neighborhood.
Thanks a lot, Nienke. I will now stop spotlighting you. And we have 15 minutes almost for questions and Q&As and discussion amongst the participants. To sum up what I heard today, I think it was great to hear both of you stories. They are so different. They have very different contexts and very different questions. And I think they very well highlight that, of course, we will be confused what LivingLab is if there are so many different approaches towards research. And then, yeah, what is it after all? So we've learned that it can provide a really great infrastructure. Nevertheless, the relationship part probably is much more difficult in that building if you do studies where you want to see effect of lighting, for example, whilst if you really want to achieve something in behavior change and understand the context, you do need to develop long-term and sustainable relationships. So I would like to invite everyone to raise their hand and ask questions. And I already see the first one, and that's Anna. Welcome, Anna. By the way, because we don't know each other and we don't have time for introductions, whenever you speak up, just say who you are so everybody knows.
Yeah, hello, I'm Anne from Utrecht University, USBO. Thank you both for your presentations. Nienke, I'm a bit jealous of your position. Sounds really interesting to experience everything you told about. You also told about investing in relationships. So you said, well, I do something for you and you do something for me. How do you feel about financial compensation for joining a LivingLab?
Well, the thing is that we that's not our goal, and they don't even ask it. So that's not even, I think, a question, because they do something for their own community. So there is an interest that's not financial actually, and that's all about being sustainable. Means that if we start, I think if we would say that we compensate them financially, we would have a lot of people wanting to join our LivingLab. And it's actually the people that want to do it from their heart for their neighborhood. And that's also the people who are willing to participate without having a financial compensation. And I think for what I see in the women, the empowerment they feel and the things that they can do for the other ladies. I mean, they even speak about if it wasn't for Corona, probably we would also have Dutch hour once a week after sports, because that's what they want to do for the other women. They don't think about how can I get better personally, but they really think how can we as a community get better. And they're not doing it because I do something for them. They see that it helps them. So that's the sustainable part, because at the end I have to be the one who can go out and they should stay. Yeah. So the main goal is that they have enough empowerment at the end that they don't need us anymore. So at the end, I hope that with the stakeholders of the neighborhood, they are the heart of the group, and we just fly in once in a while to help them if there's a problem in a small area. So,
well, in the FIDO at 2040, we study children and sports participation, children in poverty. So financial compensation might be really motivating for them. Do you think it would be an idea to get them started, to join us first and then be committed, or could it even be counterproductive?
I think it would be counterproductive, because then you don't get the people who will do it with their hearts, but the people who want the money, and at the end when the money runs down, they are the ones leaving, and you want to have the people in there who are there because they want to give their children or children of their street the best opportunities. So what I would do and suggest is, go and be as much possible in the neighborhood or in the area where you want to accomplish this, and just have talks with schools, with the stakeholders, but especially with parents and with the children themselves, and find out what they really need, what's their main concern, what's their main reason to join you. And if it's finance, it could be finance, could be an outcome, but maybe it isn't. So I would never start with the idea of compensating them, because in the poverty area, of course, money will be a motivator, but I don't think it's the right one for a LivingLab.
Okay, very clear. Thank you.
Monique, you were the second one.
Yes, thank you, Nienke and Maaike. Very interesting, very two different experiences. I work at Wageningen University, and we are in the middle of starting up LivingLabs for several projects. And one of the projects is very similar to what you shared with us, Nienke. So I'm very happy to hear your positive experiences. But one thing I think is really challenging. I totally agree. I think relationship and trust are really important. And I'm really pleased to hear that you were so successful in reaching that. But also very curious, how did you accomplish that? Because I think, I expect that it's very difficult to find the people we want to find. In the projects we starting now, we want to find the unseen people. We want to listen to the unheard people. So where do you start then? How can we find the people, and how do you build that trust?
Well, nice to see you here, Monique, because I know Monique, so this is very nice. Well, actually, we started by talking with bigger stakeholders that have connections with the groups. And I mean, when we started, we just had 6 women, and it was just because they were so happy that we listened to them, that they did the advertising themselves for us. So we had a flyer and we flyered, and I think 3 women came because of the flyer, but all the rest came because of mouth-to-mouth advertisement. And the trust relation, and so we did something that they really liked with the needs and the wishes they had. So that's the screen and the women instructor. So that's the basic. Otherwise, they don't show up. And then they liked it, and so I am there. So the investment is in being there. So building the trust relationship is really showing up. So I'm always there on 8:30. Guiding them in. I'm not doing I'm not teaching the lessons, but I'm always there just to have the talk. They see me do the same stuff, and afterwards we have a talk. And by seeing me so many times and just talking, just having small talks with them, that builds the relationship. So at the end you feel more comfortable, like, oh yeah, now I can ask something differently, now I can ask something more in depth. And they come up with the ideas themselves, like, yeah, but if you want to know more about the Ramadan, just come and join me for a day. And if it wasn't for COVID, probably some others would also have done it. And it's also you feel the balance is very close. Like if I do something wrong, it will be gone. You feel that very clearly. So you have to listen very carefully and be very aware of that there is a big difference in the situation, but being as close to them as possible. Being not don't have an objective, be non-judgment helps a lot, and just have an interest in their perspective and ideas empowers them. And for me, I felt immediately they get enthusiastic, they want to take responsibility. You can ask them a lot if it's there, but yeah, the building takes time. It is being there. So yeah, that's why the physical and space is, I think, very crucial.
And you say that being there physically, being there, a physical space. Did you say that you are at a sport organization, or what is a suitable physical space?
Yeah, so we are very, so there's a korfbalvereniging with a lot of fields around it, but also several fields within the gym. And we are there actually 2 or 3 days a week as researchers. We work there the entire day. So we made it our office space to get acquainted with the neighborhood, to get acquainted with the people. So if I get a sandwich, I see familiar faces that I know already from the neighborhood. So it's really being there, and not, because our location is, I think, 5 minutes by bike away. So I could choose to sit there and just go there once in a while. But for them knowing that I'm there, it's also some small part. One of the ladies left her jacket and she calls me, I think I forgot my jacket, and I'm there. So I have a look and I call her 5 minutes later. I said, hey, I found your jacket. Oh my God, that's so amazing. It's in such small details, just showing that you make the effort to do it, to make something happen.
May I, before I give the floor to Arnold, ask something, Maaike? So this relationship in your context, how does that work? You actually work in your own LivingLab.
Yes, that's true indeed. And personally, we did our study at the 8th and the 10th and the 11th floor, and I work at the 9th. And then you sometimes walk around, and also when I go to lunch, then I see them for lunch. But yeah, for us it's a bit different because we're not. They will never have a personal. The participants will never have a very direct personal benefit from the study. So it's really, we are getting a lot of data from them, but we are not. In the end, they don't benefit necessarily, except for the fact if we find the solution for a very alert person, and of course we could implement it, but otherwise it's not. So I do also experience that if they see you around a lot on the floors, the participants ask a lot of questions, and they're like, oh, can I already have a bit of my data? And they're very interested, but it also helps them indeed to keep them on board, let's say, because they are willing to do quite a lot for you, to wear a lot of sensors and respond to a lot of questionnaires, but you really have to keep them on board, and that helps indeed also to stay in contact with them, and if they see you around a lot.
Yeah, so that's completely different.
In a
target
way,
group.
it's similar, but in the end, they will never have the personal benefits. So in that way, it's very, very different.
But never is because of
Well,
your
never.
kind of.
If I, of course, it will take a lot of steps before my research will be in practice, and they really benefit.
All right. Okay, thank you. Arnold, we have time for one more question. So please.
I'll do it quite fast. Thank you for these very nice presentations. I have, with respect to Living Labs, a question about what, especially regarding co-design or co-involvement or participatory design or whatever you call it, that is called something like designer's bias. We had a case years ago in the north of the Netherlands where we were designing a transportation system for elderly people. And we co-designed it with them. We went, or not we, my colleague Luyen, went to Friesland and talked to these people. An electric car was designed, such a sort of golf car. And together they went around, they went to the library, to the market, and so on. And so we thought we have a very successful co-design. We have our Living Labs, hooray, hooray. And we went back to Eindhoven. We had equipped the electric cars with GPS trackers, and we found out, liberally translated, that the car was not used at all once we left. So where did our co-design go? And we went back, of course, to the elderly people, and they said, oh, we didn't care too much about transportation. We cared very much about your company. We appreciated so much that there was a nice young lady talking to us, interested in us, and whatever she would have asked, we would have joined. I make a very liberal translation. The details are far more sophisticated. So how do you deal with that? I can imagine with this Ramadan case, that indeed people may behave a little bit different because you were there, or not.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I will never know if they behave very differently if I'm around or not. I don't think so, because I think the difference is I'm not a company that comes in and they need to do something for me shortly, because they know me, because they do something they like, and I'm just there, and they know me and trust me. So I think that's a difference. And the bias is that I don't want to hear anything from them. I just want to see their world. And I also asked her, like, is this what you normally do? I also asked her, don't change your program or do anything differently. We did the bidding we did together, the washing ritual. So she showed me more about what it is to do a day of Ramadan. And I mean, it's more to get an insight in her world. And I don't think that you can hide a lot when you're an entire day together. It's not for an hour, it's not for 2 hours. It was from 10 in the morning till 10 in the evening. So I don't think she changed it too much. And I also know her well enough to know that it wasn't so much a difference from her normal day. So I don't think there's a bias. And it's also that we are code, and I mean, we try to do it with the design thinking idea. So we always evaluate, and I always evaluate almost weekly with them. Is this still how you like it? Is the way we exercise still what you like? Do you want something else? Is it too harsh? Do you want something more extensively, intensively? Or so they know actually that they can tell me what's on their mind, because I also tell them.
I think in that context, you have a very valid point. The thing is, I have to apologize that I'm such an old-fashioned engineer, and engineers always want to try out things with people. And in the past, they always tried out themselves and thought that then the whole world would accept it. Fortunately, we are now at the level that they try out things with people. But indeed, the way you describe it and the way we do it, quite often our focus is also, what do you think of my whatever we are making? And that may be a little bit more complicated than what you're describing. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Maaike and Nienke, for your input and for inspiring talks and presentations. And now it's time for our active break, which will be 20 minutes, approximately 20 minutes. So you're free to do whatever you want, also exercise and stretch and or fetch a cup of tea or coffee in the kitchen. I will shortly share this podcast with you. So it's going to be on Teams. I hope it works for you. Or if somebody really has issues with Teams and would like to listen on their other devices, then just tell me in the chat. And after I start it here, I will send you an MP3 file, which you can download from here. So give me a second and I will see you back in approximately 20 minutes. So in approximately 4:30. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Just to check if all goes well, I will press play now.
Yeah.
Can you hear it?
No.
Now?
No.
Right, you don't hear anything, but you see my screen.
Yes. Yeah. I see your screen, but maybe you have to share audio when you're sharing your screen.
I think I did that. So, and now? No?
No, I can't hear. I can't hear it.
Okay, we will try it again. I'm sorry for this. It worked yesterday. I will share my screen again. Okay, how about now?
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
I think it works.
So enjoy the 20 minutes break. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our very first Vitality Academy podcast. LivingLab has definitely become a buzzword within our community and beyond. But secretly, and at some occasions openly, many of us wonder, what do we really mean when we say Living Lab? Today, to discuss the sometimes mysterious phenomena of the Living Lab, and in particular its organic bottom-up nature, we're joined by 3 guests, and they are...
My name is Marieke Breed. I'm a researcher at the Hague University of Applied Sciences and part of the research group Impact of Sport. For me, the essence of Living Lab is to work bottom up on, in our case, social improvement. Or in other words, we start from everyday experiences of people in their local context to improve matters.
My name is Denise Filippo. I work for Radelijn as a consultant in healthcare industry. And to me, the essence of a living lab is a way to find answers to complex social dilemmas. And usually they are new social dilemmas in which the current structure does not have an answer to.
Well, my name is Steven Vos. I'm a research professor at Fontys University of Applied Sciences, and I combine it with a professorship at Industrial Design, Eindhoven University of Technology. And we mainly focus on societal issues around physical activity and vitality. And for me, the essence of a living lab is that it's in real life, that it's with real people, with real problems, and that we embrace all the bias that comes together with doing stuff in real life, and especially also bottom-up approaches.
So how do you define a living lab in your field of work?
Well, I think giving a definition for a living lab is already maybe the main problem. I think there is not one definition or the definition of a living lab. So for me, I have a minimal viable set of arguments what for me is a living lab, and well, I don't think they give a clear definition, but that means real life. So that's not within our own research institutes. That's with real people in their real context, without controlling a lot, and letting stuff happen. that's more or less for me a living lab. And it's a lab because you try to monitor processes, stuff that's going on. Because if you would not monitor it, it's just real life. I think it makes it a lab because we would like to see what's going on.
And to add on that, I always like to see three parties in the living lab: public domain, the private domain, and real life people, like people that have a problem or have a question about something where there is not an answer for at this moment. And also, I think in a living lab setting, it's very important to have it's not a permanent situation. It's like it's always temporary.
So you mean that the output and the living lab context itself is dynamic, it changes?
Yes.
I agree that it's hard to find a fixed definition. I tried in preparation on this talk, and I found the definition of Anna Stalbrost. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's often used nowadays and also in the Living Lab handbook, I guess. And she says, I'm going to read it. A Living Lab is an orchestrator of open innovation processes, focusing on co-creation of innovations in real-world contexts by involving multiple stakeholders with the objective to generate sustainable value for all stakeholders, focusing in particular on the end users. And I would say our way of working is focusing mostly on the last part of this definition. So in the real world context, involving multiple stakeholders and with the objective to generate sustainable value for all stakeholders, but particular end users like citizens.
Although we've just heard three slightly different takes on Living Lab definition, it seems there is enough overlap. Aside the real-life context and challenges, collaboration and co-creation seem to be central. So how do we collaborate in Living Labs?
I was thinking about how do you collaborate and how do you co-create in a good way? And I think, well, that's always difficult. I mean, we already talked about it, that friction is a key element in Living Lab. And for me, but it's more, that's also because of my background as an anthropologist, I think it's also the way of working in a living lab. And I see it as a need of working in an ethical way. And I borrow this concept of Sarah Banks. She's a researcher from the UK and she talks about ethics work. And I think it's really important to be to refer to the effort people make to do good work, and I think in that you can find like what is good collaboration at this moment for this group for this particular goal. So you cannot really set or write down or make like a description of good collaboration. It's an ethical way of working.
Narrative is also a very important part of Living Lab. So I think that's also what you can use in a Living Lab, because you have those different contexts and different perspectives. I'm sorry, and you can learn by creating a narrative with each other in which you have a shared language and shared values, and then it becomes more as one.
I think that's true and valuable, but at the same time, my experiences in like certain areas that you can never know what the norms and values are for people in that certain context. And I talk with a lot of people, I know a lot, but still I'm always surprised. And it's also because of my background, their background. I was in a, how do you call it, a buurthuis? Sorry.
Community home.
In the community home. And we were talking about identity, like a passport or anything. And I said, like, no, I don't have that with me. And the guy asked me, how can you not have that with you? What if the police is coming? And I said, as a blonde girl, the police would never ask me that. Never. I've never ever been asked for my identity. Never. And he said, I will be asked like 3 times a week, 4 times a week, at least. And then I will get a ticket. I would never get it. I've never had a ticket, even not if I didn't have a train ticket. I would say sorry, and then that's enough. No, but that context, that differences, I mean, I could never ever know how it is for that guy to live and to move around in the neighborhood. How does he feel if he see the police? How does he feel if he see other people moving around? I mean, it's really hard to develop a shared language if you don't live in the same context.
I think we need to train our researchers in this kind of methodology because both Denise and Marieke have a background in anthropology, and then participatory methods that's the fundamentals of anthropology, and then we talk a lot about now in all kind of research domains about participative action research, etc., etc. But it's easily said. It's difficult to be done because we step in, we step out. We go to our own home place with nice facilities, and we come in and we come out. So we are strangers anytime, and it means that it's really difficult to balance between being very empathizing what you need to do, but on the other hand, you're not part of that community. So that's a really difficult step, especially for researchers who are trained to take a distance. Because as a researcher, most of us are trained to be neutral, to try to be objective. I think we're never neutral, but that's another discussion. But you try to, so you have designed your experiment or your survey, and you let it go, and you see what comes out, and you analyze that from a distance. While you're in the field, and you're really helping to shape the field when you're in. And that's a really difficult perspective as a researcher. And I think most of us who step now towards LivingLab methodology are not trained to do that.
Indeed. Being able to understand and emphasize with others, to align with others, is very much a secret of successful collaboration. Denise mentioned narrative as a potential tool or way to co-create shared understanding and interpretation. From where I stand, the second most important ingredient we already mentioned today of a LivingLab is co-creation, and I feel it could aid precisely in these processes where shared narrative and alignment is necessary. So how do you see co-creation in LivingLab today?
I might sound a bit negative now. I really believe in co-creation or co-design or how you would call it. But I think so far, most LivingLabs as I know them, that's still limited, to be honest. That's often called that way. But if you would use a traditional participation ladder they use in social science or social work, then it's still like we ask them for an opinion and we get some and we do something with it. And that's, of course, that's already some kind of participation, but that's not really the co-creation you would like to see, because then everyone has the same weight, every voice counts for the same, everyone has the same understanding. The methods are appropriate for everyone to collect information, because some methods in itself hold already that you exclude specific people who find it difficult to put their voice on the table, or people who need some more time to think. And when you're in a group discussion, the one who thinks fast and speaks loud is most often heard. So I think that's still quite a long way to go. And I think also, when you take again a research perspective, although we strongly believe, I think, in co-creation, in the end there is, let's say, there is a time schedule you have because you want to publish something, or there is a PhD project, or there is a student project. And in one way or the other, that's already more or less, I think, pushing the direction. I strongly believe in real co-creation, but I think we also need to empower people, all people involved, to learn to do that, because our society is not built on co-creation, although we believe that, but I think it's limited so far. So I think I really believe, but I'm not that positive that we're already doing that in a good way. But that's my personal opinion.
It's interesting, Stephen. I wrote down in preparation on this talk, I wrote down at this question, one word, power. So in line with Stephen, I think I also totally believe in co-creation. I think it's necessary, and I think we all want to do co-creation. But then I hear questions like, but are you sure the citizens can talk with us on the table? Do you think they understand? And do they know, do citizens know what they want? And I think, yes, of course they know, and of course they can, but maybe they cannot sit on the table like this for 3 hours, but maybe we have to go to them. How about just go to the people and ask them, or do it in a different way? Or maybe if people are not capable of reading or writing, or maybe do something else, use creative methods. But I think there's quite a long way to go yet, because it's we find it hard as professionals and also as researchers to do something completely different, and also again this insecurity that we don't know how it would go, and also there are certain goals we have to achieve also in our research, indeed, writing papers, fundings, everything. So I would say we need a lot more space, or moral space, for good co-creation.
I totally agree, and I also think that when you really co-create, that means that you have to give some of your own space, and that's the hardest thing for some, maybe even more the professionals, more so professionals than for citizens, because yeah, if the citizen is co-creating, they might say something that you do not believe is the good thing, or that it will change your work or your perspective. So yeah, I think that's the hardest part. It's the behavioral part of it.
Thank you very much for these valuable insights. I think most of us will indeed agree that co-creation still has not revealed its true power in the LivingLab setting, and that there is much to learn about how to best implement co-creation in LivingLabs. Now I'd like to switch to a bit different topic. Today, many research and intervention activities in innovation context are required to deliver societal impact. In other words, to create meaning for society. How and what role do you think LivingLabs play in creating societal impact?
Impact for me is something on 8, 10, 15 years. If it's what in my definition is impact, because it's really changing something. If you, for example, if you would like to change health, you will see that in 15 years. You will not see you might see an immediately weight reduction, but that's not impact for me. That's very close to output. Don't step into the trap that you can prove the impact on a short term. I personally do not believe, but I hope I'm not.
So I hope to change something for the good for people in this area, and that they can feel like a small improvement, and then yeah, I hope it will last and grow and grow and grow. But you never know, because you don't have like 100% influence. I mean, you don't know what it's real life.
You can have a big impact for one person or for the community, or but if you relate it to policy, then yeah, it might take years, and that's more meso or macro level. Then it might take years, and you're not sure that one LivingLab resulted in that change. So I think you have to believe that you're contributing to a transformation, and the transformation is a long-term movement.
Yes, I think I couldn't agree more. Impact takes time. We're almost at the end of our talk show, but before we wrap up, one last question to y'all. How does one keep LivingLab going?
Well, I have two positions. One in the University of Applied Science, one in the university. For me, it's clear from the side from the University of Applied Sciences, we cannot mess around with our with our professionals. So if we go to a city and we do something in a neighborhood, we will not only be there for that one research project. Many of our students are there for their internships. We have relations with municipalities. So it's not just that one research study we do. I think one of the key tips I would like to give from that side, invest in long-term living labs.
Just try and connect, not do the same thing over and over again. A colleague of mine came up with the concept of estafette research for students, which is really, really good, I think, to prevent doing the same thing over and over again, also for the citizens themselves.
Time and money is, we don't want that to be leading, but it is a very important element. And also, what is going to happen with the output, with the outcome of the Living Lab? Is our policy makers or our people who want to do something with this, are they really going to do something with it?
Dear Denise, Steven, and Marike, thank you so much for being here today. I am sure our listeners learned a lot from our conversations, and I'm also sure that this podcast triggered loads of questions about present and future of the Living Labs. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we end this talk show with last thoughts about where the future of Living Labs lay.
In the future, Living Labs are the common way we work on wicked problems in society. And I hope, my dream is, that there's more moral space for open endings, not knowing, and especially from funding organizations and professionals. And so methods and outcomes do not have to be prescribed. And we all work together in an ethical way on improving society.
I hope that in future Living Labs are accepted as input for policymakers and especially in the politics. I think currently we're in a very awkward situation in politics, and maybe they should go and get their input from a Living Lab, because I think that transparency and open culture is very important. So yeah, I hope it integrates more.
In the future, I believe that the concept of Living Labs probably will have a different name, but that we keep that fundament and that they're more or less common sense. I think if we would do a lot in life based on common sense, then we would learn a lot, both from a research perspective and from a policy perspective.
All right, welcome back. I hope most of you are back, because we will need your attention for our second part. Thanks for the guest, Denise. I see you here. It's super nice to have you here. I don't know if Marike is here. Steven couldn't be here, but he promised he's gonna listen to the podcast and watch the whole masterclass later on. And now we're back to our presentations, and actually we will try to focus a little bit more inwards. So we will look at what Living Lab actually means and how do we use Living Lab concept and phenomena in within our Vitality Academy research. And I think that is quite interesting for also our guests of this masterclass from outside on our close network. So the first thing that we will do is we will, during preparations for this masterclass, we conducted a small survey that we sent out to a Vitality Academy community and close network also, to ask some questions about what Vitality, what Living Lab actually is and how people perceive it and use it in their context of work. And that presentation is provided by us. So Lonneke, our colleague, will reflect on this on her presentation, in her presentation. Unfortunately, she cannot be here live today with us. So she recorded her presentation and we will share it with you in 1 second. Afterwards, we will also talk about Living Labs in our vlogs, and we'll have some spotlight pitches about the research projects that probably one way or another touch upon Living Lab concept within Vitality Academy. And the questions for both podcast and everything what we will discuss now will come last. Ailo, could you please share the presentation?
Yes, let me know whether you can hear it, yeah?
Yeah, sure. No, I think, have you done the same what I had to do? You also have to have your mic on, I think. Now your mic is off.
Yes. I would try again.
Lonneke van Leeuwen,
Yes.
and I work at the Vital 2040 project at the UMCU in Utrecht. Unfortunately, I'm not able to attend the masterclass live because at this exact moment I am enjoying a rehearsal show for the Eurovision Song Contest semi-finals with my family. Luckily, with my increased abilities in online working, I was able to record this presentation in advance to be shown during the LivingLab masterclass. So today I would like to share with you the results of the online survey about LivingLab research, which we distributed amongst Vitality Academy members recently. As organizers of this masterclass, we thought it would be interesting to collect and present Vitality Academy's members' thoughts and experiences with LivingLab research. Therefore, a short while ago, we sent you all an email with a link to an online survey we developed in Qualtrics. A screenshot of the survey is shown on the right. And 16 of you completed the survey, so thank you very much for recording your thoughts and experiences through this questionnaire. The first question of the survey was as follows. Think of a living lab. Which words come to mind first if you were to list defining characteristics of a living lab? And please provide a maximum of 5 words. So now I want to show you what words came to mind in the Vitality Academy participants. As can be seen, many different words come to mind. However, many words describe more or less the same characteristic, which led to the following more simplified word cloud. So the following characteristics define living labs according to you all. The first is real life or ecological setting, and this was mentioned by 10 participants. Another characteristic is co-creation and engagement, which was mentioned by 9 of you. The third is data and research. This was mentioned also by 9 of you. And innovation was mentioned by 6 of you. End users and citizens, local or neighborhood was mentioned by 5 of you. So please take a moment to look at the words and also at the words I did not mention. So the second question of the survey was, which definition or definitions of living labs do you use in your scientific work? So 4 published definitions of living labs were mentioned in the responses of the survey. The first definition of living labs is, living labs are defined by new collaborations, working with and within networks, space for research, mutual curiosity, new connections, an open and creative attitude, crossover, co-creation, public-private, and bottom-up. And the source of this definition is the Ministry of Economics, who have a really nice webpage devoted to living lab research. The second definition is collaborative platforms for research, development and experimentation in a real-life setting based on specific methodologies and tools and implemented through specific innovation project and community building activities. The third definition that was mentioned is Living Labs are a research and design methodology applied by research institutes in cooperation with public and private partners for developing and testing innovations in co-creation with users in real-life settings. And the last definition that was mentioned is Living Labs are defined as user-centered open innovation ecosystems based on a systematic user co-creation approach, integrating research and innovation processes in real-life communities and settings. And 4 participants of the survey did not work with a published or specific definition, but defined the concept by themselves. So the third question in the questionnaire was whether participants have any experience with Living Lab research, and if so, which research questions were answered by using Living Labs. So within the Vitality Academy, the following interesting research questions have been answered previously or are answered currently with Living Lab research. So the first research question is, what is the impact of network configurations and professional routines on the organization of inclusive sporting? The second question is, how can living pleasure of independently living elderly be improved? The third question is, how does aggression evolve in relation to the dynamics of social and physical context in a Stratumseind 2.0 Living Lab in Eindhoven? The fourth question is, how do people living with dementia evaluate the prototype of the serious game Playtime with regard to usability, appropriateness and acceptability? The fifth question is, how can we develop a contextual sport and movement program that contributes to the increase of valuable encounters and thus contributes to the increase of social cohesion in neighborhoods? Living Lab research has also been used to evaluate several healthcare interventions or innovations in the general practitioner practices. And lastly, it has been used to collect neighborhood-related data to develop neighborhood-related innovations. So the fourth question within the survey was, what are challenges while conducting Living Lab research, in your opinion? So a lot of challenges were mentioned in the survey, and it's quite surprising that we still are motivated to work in a Living Lab, given the enormous amount of challenges that were mentioned. But I tried to categorize them a little bit to give a more of an overview. So the first category that could be identified was, I labeled it dependency. And this category included issues like that we are dependent on stakeholders in gaining access to a Living Lab, but we are also depending on changes in a setting of a Living Lab. The second category I could identify, I labeled it involvement. And it included issues like that you have to explain Living Lab research and goals well to stakeholders, that you should have attention for those involved in Living Lab, and this is a challenge. And there also may be resistance of citizens to living in a Living Lab. The third category I identified included issues related to the involvement of the end user and how to develop a sustainable collaboration with stakeholders. A challenge that was also mentioned here was it takes a lot of time to collaborate and to develop a good collaboration with stakeholders. Other issues that were mentioned here are commitment, communication, lack of a sense of urgency within the LivingLab, access to professionals, clarity about professional stakeholders' roles, but also stakeholders' perceptions about the role of the researcher within a LivingLab, how to select stakeholders within a LivingLab, and transdisciplinary collaboration is also a challenge. The fourth category I identified was about research, and issues that were mentioned there was that it's a challenge to study relationships between psychology, behavior, and the environment in an ecological setting. It's also a challenge to study stakeholder perspectives or to connect or how to connect to earlier or local initiatives within the LivingLab. Another challenge here was how to keep data up to date and who exactly is paying for the governance of LivingLab. So the challenge here is, I guess, some clarity about who pays for the LivingLab. And the last category I identified, I labeled it results. So it's a challenge to how to return to society, partners and citizens after having performed LivingLab research. Also a challenge to publish the results in international journals, or how to translate the results to a wider context, or to upscale it, or to generalize it. And lastly, it's a challenge to balance scientific rigor and interests or wishes of societal partners. And of course, we also asked what are opportunities while conducting LivingLab research, in your opinion. And this was the fifth question of the questionnaire. So, like the challenges, also a lot of opportunities were mentioned in the responses of the survey, and I tried to categorize them as well. And the categories are presented here. So the first category is an opportunity that LivingLab research leads to societal and practical relevant research. Here it was mentioned that the output meets the needs of the end user, that participants are given a voice, that it's real life ecological research, and it's able to involve difficult to involve groups, and knowledge is quickly available and easy to implement in the LivingLab. The second category I labeled it societal partners, and here it was mentioned that LivingLab research provides an opportunity to learn from societal partners and to build strong relationships where there's an active role for all parties involved, with a shared responsibility and also a long-term commitment. Opportunity that was also mentioned here was that existing networks can be used in LivingLab research, and also boundaries can be crossed in a LivingLab research. The third category, I labeled it innovation, because LivingLab research provides an opportunity to experiment with and learn from new interventions, collaborations, and methods. The fourth category I labeled data, and here it was mentioned that LivingLab research can lead to unique insights, first-hand experiences, rich data, real-time data, but also an opportunity here is that previously collected data within the LivingLab can be used. Other opportunities that were mentioned are that it takes place in a defined setting with co-design, and that's a flexible way of doing research. I hope that I have been able to provide you an interesting insight into existing knowledge, experiences and perceptions relating to LivingLab research within the Vitality Academy. As shown, if you have any issues or questions related to LivingLab research, I think multiple Vitality Academy members may be able to help you out. And I hope that this little study and its results have inspired you all to contribute to exchanging knowledge and collaborate to be able to perform a high quality LivingLab research. Bye!
Thanks, Lonneke. I hope you're watching this recording and so thanks a lot for reflecting and summarizing the results of the survey. And now we are going to our next program point, and that is vlogs. So our free researchers, our own from the Talent Academy, will reflect on their research project, the most salient and recent LivingLab research projects that were accomplished within a LivingLab setting. So I first invite Marielle to do that.
Mijn naam is Marielle Jambroes en ik ga jullie een voorbeeld geven van een project dat wij hebben uitgevoerd in LivingLab Leidse Rijn in Utrecht. Wat hebben we gedaan? We hebben een wijkgezondheidsbeeld ontwikkeld en dat hebben we gedaan door verschillende beschikbare databronnen over de gezondheid van de populatie in Leidse Rijn naast elkaar te leggen en op zo'n manier een rijk kwantitatief beeld te ontwikkelen, wat we vervolgens met professionals en burgers uit die wijk hebben besproken en min of meer hebben geduid. En samen met die professionals en de burgers hebben we vastgesteld wat nou de belangrijkste gezondheidsproblemen zijn in Leidse Rijn en wat nodig is om die gezondheid het komend jaar met elkaar te gaan verbeteren. En wat maakte het nou een LivingLab experiment? Nou, dat we een nieuwe methode hebben ontwikkeld voor het maken van zo'n rijk gezondheidsbeeld. Dat we van het LivingLab meerdere databronnen beschikbaar hebben. Dat er nauwe samenwerking is met de professionals en de burgers. En dat er eigenlijk ook een hele multidisciplinaire samenwerking is, waarin gemeenten, kennisinstituten, organisaties uit de wijk en burgers samen aan het ontwikkelen slaan. Wat is nou lastig aan zo'n LivingLab? Nou, in mijn ervaring is dat met name het onderhouden van een LivingLab. Willen burgers in een LivingLab wonen en hoe zorg je dat je middelen hebt om de basisinfrastructuur en de organisatie van een LivingLab op orde te houden?
And now our second researcher, that's Anna Anning. She's here also today.
In 2018, I conducted a study on residential happiness of older adults living independently at home. At that time, I noticed an increase in all kinds of living technologies and smart solutions such as stair lifts to increase the possibilities of older adults to age in their own place. I wondered, but do these adults also experience more happiness living independently at home with these solutions? So together with older adults, I developed the concept of residential happiness, which is a personal evaluation of feelings such as joy, relaxation, safety, feeling at home, freedom, and connected to others. Well, the aim of this study was to explore objects and places that would increase the residential happiness of older adults living independently at home. There were 7 residential settings, such as a service apartment, owner-occupied residences, a group home, social housing, but also a charity-supported residence. And the service apartment was our LivingLab, in which we designed the common space on the top floor. Well, this top floor was the setting, but the definition of our LivingLab also included the neighborhood and the neighbors. So this was also a social aspect that was very important, besides the geographical boundaries. What further defined the LivingLab was that it defined a participatory action research in which co-creation with the users was very important. There were a few challenges. The first one were the power relations, for example, between the manager of the service apartment, but also the municipality and an architect were involved, besides, of course, the older adults. And also the roles of these partners were not that defined at the beginning, but also during the project, we noticed that these rules changed. Third, there were all kind of practicalities and costs of the project, of course, but also regarding the top floor and the plans that we had. So the owner of the apartment was not that enthusiastic anymore when he first noticed the costs involved. And fourth, there were all kinds of vulnerabilities, we would say, of the participants. For example, some suffered with dementia, and that made it sometimes difficult to deal with the findings of the research. But these were all worth overcoming, because we were very surprised by the creativity of the older adults living in this service apartment. So far, my experiences.
Thanks, Anna. And the last one, last but not least, is Iris.
Hi all, my name is Iris, and in this mini vlog I want to shortly reflect on my experiences with working with the LivingLab methodology. In my previous project at Mental Healthcare Institute Eindhoven de Kempen, I closely collaborated with people with dementia and their informal caregivers to develop a serious game. We involved them in all phases of technology development through our so-called user-driven LivingLab design. And in this design, we organized focus groups to explore the needs and preferences of people with dementia already early on in the development processes, and to gather user feedback on design concepts. We also conducted in-context field studies to test serious game prototypes at the homes of people with dementia in their real-life environment. And because I closely collaborated with people with dementia, I especially learned how to involve more vulnerable groups in your LivingLab. And what I observed is that it's really important to establish a personal connection with the people you are working with, to make sure that they are more at ease and more open to share and reflect on their experiences, especially for people with dementia, because due to their cognitive impairment, they are often more insecure about their capabilities to participate in a research project. Another thing I learned is that you need to adjust your materials, especially your research materials, when working with more vulnerable groups. In our project, for example, the standardized 5-scale Likert questionnaires were way too difficult for people with dementia to understand due to difficult language and confusing answer possibilities. People, for example, found the difference between totally agree and agree really confusing, because for them it was both the same. You both agree, so why do you need to choose? They ask. And instead they prefer to provide a grade from 1 to 10 as they were used to do at school. These are some of my experiences. If you want to hear more, please feel free to ask.
Indeed, Iris and Anna are still in this meeting, so after our last part of the program, you can still get in debate with them, and always reach out to Mariella. So we are back to talking about relationships, trust, exchange, empowerment, and time. I think these are the concepts that reoccur throughout the whole of today. And I would like to now invite our researchers. There are 3 projects currently running in Vitality Academy, and that is Vital at 2040, SICE, where you met already Anna and Iris from, and Vitality Data Center. And we are inviting one of the researchers from these projects to tell us very briefly about how their research projects relate to a LivingLab context. And the first one is Xiong. Xiong, are you here?
Yes, yeah, I'm here.
The floor is yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, for the Vitality Data Center project, we have collected a number of the environmental data sets, for example, and green data, green space data, noise data, air pollution data, and all these environmental factors we collected that could have influenced people's physical activities and can influence people's health. So for the LivingLab research, we can support this research by assessing the environmental exposures. For example, exposure to the noise, exposure to the air pollution, and more specifically, for example, for the Vitality 2040 project, we can support the project by looking at how this natural and built environments influence children's physical activities, and we can, and also for the SETS project, we can also enrich the project by looking at how environments influence the vulnerable groups in participating in sports. Yeah, that's my
Thanks. That's great. Indeed, like you are giving us an example on how data and environmental data can help research of, for example, behavioral change. And I think that goes back also to Micah's presentation, where we started from the environment and how good it would be if we could record enough information about the environment in the LivingLabs. Thanks a lot, Jian. I think now is Ayla who is going to tell something about Vital 2040.
Yeah, I'm happy to present the Vital 2040 project. That's a project that aims to support the development and the evaluation of interventions that promote physical activity in children living in poverty. And then especially those children who currently do not meet the recommended levels of physical activity. And the current data collection focuses on identifying, limiting, and facilitating factors of sport participation. And the project started with a study on the use of existing sport-related financial support funds in Eindhoven and Utrecht. And in a second step, we aim to develop interventions in the LivingLabs. And in this project, we consider LivingLabs as kind of applied research in the local context, where co-creation and the interaction between the locals, the professionals, and policy are central for this systemic innovation. But the particular boundaries of the LivingLabs are not yet determined and will be defined also together with the target group and professionals. And then with the input from researchers and by means of co-creation sessions, we intend to better implement those existing interventions and to develop new interventions that particular suit the individual context of the both cities, Eindhoven and Utrecht, and are closely collaborated with those youth in poverty, their parents, professionals, and then with the overall aim to promote physical activity. And with regard to the Vitality Academy, we can also imagine to further collaborate together with the SIZE project that will be introduced in a second, by making use of each other's networks on the LivingLab, so that not one LivingLab, so one LivingLab is perceived both a research project as an integrated effort instead of a burden. So actually that two projects, for example, can take place in one LivingLab. And further, we are also interested in collaborating together with the Vitality Data Center that Seong just introduced, to identify ways on how we can strengthen, especially the data collection and make use of the data in the field.
Super, really nice. I mean, you also probably highlight that a socio-ecological system kind of approach in your project. And it's really, I think the fact that Vital 2040 is a part of Vitality Academy can help us to also build these sustainable relationships that were mentioned before. I really like that you said to create continuation instead of burdening the participants, for example, or the local networks. So actually Vitality Academy name can help us do that, right? And build on each other's research. So you already mentioned size, and I would like to invite Susan to present us what is all about in size and what role Living Labs play there.
Yes, so thanks. So in the following, I'll give you like a short insight into how we use the Living Labs or Living Labs approach within our size project on calibrating inclusive sporting encounters. Shortly, what we aim to do with our project, for those who aren't really familiar with it yet, we actually aim from like a multi-level approach to make sport more inclusive for marginalized groups, because a lot of people in marginalized situations currently don't participate in sport. And we actually aim to achieve that by first advancing the knowledge, like the academical knowledge, on professional routines as well as network configurations and how they influence the organization of these sporting encounters and the inclusivity. And the second thing is that we actually really want to develop interventions that help organizing or designing sporting encounters that are inclusive for marginalized groups. And as you can already see on the screen, we also are part of the 2 Living Labs. On the left, we have Tongeren, a very heterogeneous area in Eindhoven, and on the right, Leidse Rijn, which is a completely new built neighborhood, still growing very enormously, located in Utrecht. And how we actually incorporate these Living Labs within our project is on the next slide. Ayla, could you? Perfect, thanks. So first of all, as I said before, we actually want to advance knowledge. And there we already have like the 2 Living Labs. So we have like real life context or real life environments with the opportunity to really talk to people there. So we can collaborate with organizations, social or sport organizations. And we also aim, of course, to talk or reach out to the marginalized groups themselves. And by talking to them or getting insights from them, we actually have the chance to get like a real in-depth understanding of the situation. So really from a socio-ecological environment to look at the broader picture, which we might not have if we only look from it from the outside. And then the second part, which actually also want to feed our knowledge that we gain into, and which is here also depicted on the right side, that we actually want to do via a design process. We actually want to develop interventions such as guidelines or maybe prototypes that that help make sport more inclusive via addressing, for example, network configurations or professional routines to really help make sport inclusive sporting encounters. And there we actually really want to use the Living Lab method or methodology to really co-create or co-design together with the people who are in the end the user of these interventions. So we really want to design iteratively with stakeholders, with frontline workers, with the people in marginalized situations to really have like not a top-down approach from research, but really a bottom-up approach to have interventions that are based on the experiences and the needs the people articulate, because it's supposed to help them. And I think, as Nienke also said before, that they might come up with the best solution. So we might not see it in our bubble, but together with them, we have like something we wouldn't think of, and that's most fitting for their needs. And I think with collaboration, I think Ayla also said before that we really can join efforts, for example, with Vital 2040 to use the networks. And yeah, so far about the size project.
Great, thank you very much. So it is 5:06. We booked a little bit more time, but I can understand and imagine that after today's so informative 2-hour session, everybody's brain is a little bit tired. Although we had enough time to stand up and walk around, I think cognitively we excelled in contemplating, especially about such a complex definition in summary of a living lab. So in summary, I think we've heard now and again recurring concepts such as relationship and trust building and exchange, so give and get, and don't forget that. Also being able to step out of a bubble and being open to our perspective, and know that living lab research requires time. So before we can do any testing or co-creation, and that is also definitely a landscape for that, for design iterations or technologies and development, we still need to set up a landscape for a context for that. And that is through this quite laborious process of relationship building. I would like to thank all contributors for being here today, and for some of you who left a bit early, I hope you are still rewatching the recording. And I would like to keep the mic open now. So I think that some people who still have a few minutes, we can answer our last questions for the ones with the, for example, size, Vital 20 or data, that are the data center people, or discuss in general the definition of LivingLab and reflect on today. What did we learn? Or did it confuse us more than before? Any reflections are welcome, and or questions. I see, Zion, you have a question or raised hand, or maybe.
Yes, I do have a question. I'm still a bit confused. So what's the difference between the LivingLab research and the field studies? I think these two, I'm still a bit confused. So you can have more control in the LivingLab research, and in the field study, then you just observe, then get what you learned from the study. I don't know. Is this really the difference or not the difference?
I think one of the main differences that I heard today is that field study is a sample of some data, and some sort of, sometimes can be longitudinal and take a bit longer, but it is within the given period of time. And LivingLab is something that should be more long lasting, and I think more sustainable in that sense. So if you ask me, I think that is the main difference. That relationship for field study, you might also need it. And you can also conduct your field studies within an existing LivingLab, of course, but it can exist by itself. And LivingLab research is something that, yes, it's more long-term, I suppose. Anybody else has one?
Yeah, but you can also have conduct long-term field study. That's also, I don't know, if that can be also be called field study. But if you look at the fields in for a couple of years, and that could also be, I don't know, could be the field study.
I think indeed it can be both, because I mean, it really depends on your research question and how you use the term LivingLab. Because if I hear all these stories, then indeed often in my type of research, the LivingLab is often used just as a field study, but it's very momentary. So I want to test something and I get data and I write results. And those results are not directly for only that group. So indeed what Inna said, it's a bit of a sample, but these results I want to, in the end, generalize to the wider population. Whereas if you are really doing something like co-creation, it's a very different type of study, and it's very different from what I feel is a field study for me, because it's more that you're trying to do something for the people and trying to create something for them. So it's so dependent on your type of work and the background that you have and the idea that you have with a LivingLab. It can be the same as a field study, but it can also be completely different. It's just what you interpret it as a LivingLab to be.
Yeah.
There's actually a nice document about that. Perhaps you already know it, from the Rathenau Institute, who kind of classify different things that people call living labs, but they actually argue that there are 4 types and only one would be a living lab, and another is, like, for example, a field lab. Mm-hmm. It's in Dutch, but I can share it.
Yeah, it would be nice. Thanks.
Yeah, very nice indeed.
I think they kind of see 2 dimensions of these kinds of initiatives, and one of them is also the degree of participation, which we just discussed. And they say that the Living Lab should actually have participation and then not just kind of, extract the data.
Right. Sample data.
Yeah.
Monique, do you have any thoughts on this? How was your experience? How did you experience today?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's really interesting to see so many examples of living labs. And yeah, the definition. There are many definitions, and I like the overview with the references. But I also would like to go a step further and ask you if you are aware of evidence-based approaches of LivingLab methods or co-design methods. Is there some kind of overview of, we discussed, for example, trust is a really important concept. So it's really interesting to share each other experiences from practice, but I was really wondering if there also evidence-based, are there papers on it? Do you know?
Yeah, there are papers. So I have done some literature review concerning Living Labs. If you go to European Network of Living Labs, there is a conference yearly. It's called Open Living Lab Days or Digital Living Lab Days. By the way, they are now open for papers and workshops, so it might be very interesting. I will also share the link in the chat. So depends where you look at, but from open innovation literature, there you have a lot of papers published on the concept of Living Lab, definition, and what are the major characteristics of it. However, you will not find a handbook really. Like if you look for some sort of handbook to help you find a way to do Living Lab research or set up Living Lab research, you will get confused. So I think on one hand, some research projects, for example, or some intervention projects, they do publish handbooks of their own. And then my question is then, why don't we have something that is fit for all? And maybe it's because a Living Lab by itself is very bottom up. So every context is so much different. But I think I completely agree with you. We still could dissolve some sort of 5 main things that are characteristic of a Living Lab, and that we can help and maybe investigate further, like to provide methods. Like co-creation by itself is very, very broad. You can use co-creation to indeed, like we talked at the beginning, you can use co-creation to test a specific lighting scenario and then go away, or you can use co-creation to create policies where people get involved and it somehow changes their behavior. And there are so many different methods. So actually in SAI's project, we're working on that a little bit. So how do you focus? Because if you think about Living Lab, collaboration is central, co-creation is central, and by itself they are extremely complex processes, and they require a lot of facilitation and knowledge also, and people overlook that. So what I see in the literature, that is often mentioned as a core characteristic, but no guidance is given on how do you build on it, even on collaboration, or how do you make it sustainable, or these issues that we talked today, that how do you balance the burden and integration and building up on each other's work? It's not so easy. It also doesn't really align with our system of funding, right? We get for money for 4 years, and I mean, this was my PhD as well. And then and then another one comes. So in a way, I feel that Vitality Academy and similar networks could actually strengthen this integration of research and building on it. So if we work together and we maybe present ourselves as, hey, I'm Indra and I'm from Vitality Academy, but not from SAIS. Eventually, if Mike exchanges me later 2 years, then she's still from Vitality Academy and they know what it is. So she needs to get to know the context, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing I really liked about today. Really well organized. Thank you so much. And then we can now, have a start with an overview of all the knowledge that is out there within the Vitality Academy and our collaboration partners, because there is a lot of experience and there is a lot of knowledge, but we cannot always find it. So it's a great start today.
Yeah, really, I'm really happy, and I'm really happy that all of you were here. I think it's time to close. I would like to wish Ayla a great maternity leave. We will miss you very, very much, and we will wait for you to organize the next one, the next masterclass. And thanks, Maaike, for presenting today, and everyone else for being here. And we'll see each other soon again.
Yes, thank you
Thank
so
you very
much
much for organizing.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.